Hello and welcome to our online IETF 108 meeting. We're at our appointed start time, so we're going to get started. If my audio level or any audio levels are not great, just feel free to put that into Jabber. I think we have enough people watching that will catch that. We have myself, I'm Lou Berger. We have Kent Watson and Joel Jegley, my co-chairs online. I actually just did something I meant to remind people not to do, which is when you start talking, please identify yourself so that others can easily recognize who's talking. Our agenda has been posted, as have all been the slides. Also, please join us in the link that I just sent into chat to help us out with the joint minute taking. We have a new tool that is replacing Etherpad. Next, please. By the way, thank you to Kent, who's going to show slides for all presenters. This is our Note Well. It should be pretty familiar to everyone. If you're not, please click on that link at the bottom or go to the link on the bottom. And that will tell you about what governs our interactions here. It governs that what you say here will become part of our permanent record. It's being recorded. Also, it is a contribution. Anything you say is a contribution to the IETF. Notably, it also governs how we interact with each other, how we speak to each other, and how we respect each other. That is also part of this Note Well. Next, please. So I think we all know we're on Meet Echo. We are using Meet Echo for queue control. If you want to join the queue, select the speech button, the mic, and we've already mentioned the joint note-taking. Blue sheets are being handled by Meet Echo, so we don't have to do anything special there. Next, please. So we're going to cover a number of topics ranging from the more mature to the less mature. We have an update on a couple of documents that are long past last call, and then talking about where the versioning activity is, and we have a couple of updates on that. Excuse me. And then on to the common data types, and that'll be the end of our working group documents, and we have one document that is an individual draft. Next. So in terms of where are we? We have a couple of new documents published by the RFC editor, so that's always great to see new documents published. We also have 3 documents in the editor queue. One of them is just recently in there. I'm identifying the shepherds on each of these, and if they want to chime in and say anything, they can, or if there's any questions, they're the right people to ask about that. We also have a number of documents that are post last call and are the first 2 are on the agenda, and the others are moving through the process. Next. Thanks. So we have no liaison activity right now, but the next 2 documents that are going to be discussed relate to Ethernet technology, which is really owned by the IEEE. And recently there was some discussion about how a different working group should have sent a liaison for their IEEE related work. So the question I'd like to ask the author or authors is if we need one here. This is also open to working group discussion, but we'll discuss that in the next slot. Next. We wanted to remind folks that we have definitely transitioned to a new world. I mean, I think we all are living it, so we all are keenly aware. But it's going to be some time while we're going to continue working remote. And we wanted to make it clear that the working group resources, notably the working group WebEx, is available for informal meetings on documents, as well as interim meetings, virtual interims. And all that it takes to do either of those is to send a message to the chairs and to make a request. and we'll happily set up a meeting. Those meetings will be public and open to all in the working group, as well as announced to the working group. Of course, we also have the mailing list, which is how we gauge consensus of the working group. Next. Apparently that's my last slide. So we are now going to move on to Rob.
Is my audio working?
Yeah, there we go.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So hopefully I'll keep this update fairly quick. So actually now it's Interface Extensions Yang 10. I published a minor update yesterday, so I'll cover that as well. So next slide, please. So the question is working group last call complete? The working group last call I think was initiated might have been a year ago, or certainly at least 8 months, quite a while. It's taken a long time to resolve this. I got slightly distracted with some of the Yang versioning work, and then I became an AD, so I've had various issues on my time to get it resolved. I think now that all the issues that have been raised through working group last call, I believe, have been resolved in the documents. I posted an update to the list a couple of weeks back. I haven't seen any response from them. My guess that Martin is probably away sailing, so it's tricky for him to respond, so I need to wait a little bit longer, and also waiting for Don to feedback. There's one issue in each of the drafts I just wanted to highlight in terms of that working last call. Most of the other issues I don't think particularly are important. So next slide, please. So in the interface extensions, I think when I presented this 2 ITFs ago, I was looking back through the slides, there was a proposal to add a new in discards overflow counter to this module. So we raised that this was missing and useful. And whilst I agree it is useful, I'm not sure it really fits into the scope of what this document is covering, this draft is covering. And hence my proposal is that we shouldn't do this now for this document. And if we do want to have this count, I think it would be better as an update to the base IETF interfaces Yang module, if anywhere. So my proposal here is to make no changes and not introduce this counter. So does anyone have any objections to that? So I don't see any. If there is, can you please bring it to the list fairly quickly? Otherwise, I think it will stay as it is at the moment. Next slide. So, so most of the working group last call updates I've made to recently have been to the subinterface VLAN model. There's lots of useful and helpful comments in terms of improving the Yang module and tightening up some of the descriptions in various places, the technologies that's useful. The most significant change here really is a name change for the modules. So before it was, and this was one that Martin requested, before it was IETF IFL3 VLAN. Given that the VLAN encapsulation, the basic VLAN encapsulation, can be used for L2 as well as L3, I've changed the name of the module to just IETF IF VLAN encapsulation. And then the other Yang module, IETF flexible encapsulation, has had IF added into it to make it clear that it's sort of effectively augmenting interface technologies. I think this gives a more clear split between like basic VLAN functionality and the flexible encapsulation that you would normally use for L2, and allows you to match on, say, ranges of VLANs or .1p bits, for example, and to do sort of tag manipulations. So that's the key change that's really happened. Most of the other changes have been sort of editorial changes and cleaning out and clarifying various places. Does anyone have any concerns with this change now? If so, please come to the mic line. I don't see any, or bring it to the list. So otherwise, I sort of feel that we're probably done. From my perspective, I'll leave the chairs to comment on that. I think it would be good to hear back from the individuals who provided comments during the last call to check that they're happy that their comments have been addressed. So back to you, Lou, if that's okay.
You were a little quick removing the slides, though, Kent. So on the question of are we ready, I think you hit it. We need to confirm with those who had comments that the comments are addressed. Be great to ask them on lists and get them to respond on lists. If they only respond privately, that's okay. Just let us know that they respond to you privately. The other thing on this change, I do remember we had a little bit of a discussion about whether IEEE would worry about the VLAN, use of the VLAN term, since that's really theirs. And this goes back quite a while. I believe you and I had a private discussion that said, oh, we're calling it L3 VLAN, so that should keep them happy. But this sort of goes to the larger question of, do we need to send a liaison over to the IEEE saying, you know, we're progressing these, do you have any comments? Or, you know, are we okay with the fact that you are a contributor there and we have the IEEE coordination group? And I'll point out that we have the IEEE coordination group, but that other I2RS document, which we thought had been raised many times, the IEEE came back and said, no, you didn't raise it. So I'm a little hesitant just to leave it there. With that, back to you.
So yeah, so to answer this question, and the other comment I should make, obviously being an author on these two drafts, the intention is to hand responsibility, AD responsibility over to Warren. I think he's agreed to do that, or hope he's happy to do that. And in terms of, hence I'll leave it to him to confirm what I'm proposing here. In terms of IEEE, I don't think any formal liaisons required. So the IEEE have certainly had chances to review these documents, or in particular the sub-interface VLAN model, and have provided feedback into them in terms of the current structure and things. So they have been involved in the process. So that's, I think, hopefully good. And I believe that they are reasonably accepting of what the current structure is. I would like them to be able to review these final versions and check that they are still happy with that. Rather than a formal liaison, the way I would propose is to go both through the IETF IEEE coordination email address, email alias, and also a meeting if required. But there's also an IEEE Youngsters meeting that I participate in on a semi-regular basis, and so I would make a suggestion that those IEEE Youngsters review the latest version of these documents to check that they're still happy. And for confirmation, it's the IEEE Youngsters who are currently reviewing the I2RS document to check that they're happy. So I have some connections with them there. So that would be what I propose, as long as Warren feels that that is a reasonable, and the working group a reasonable approach forward.
While we're giving time for Warren to enter the queue, if he so chooses, to me that sounds just fine. And to be clear, you're saying you'll send that message. The alternative, by the way, is I'm on both of those lists also. I'm happy to send it, but I'm also, whatever you prefer.
Either. So Lou, let's take that one offline. I think I don't mind which way around. We can work out. I don't think I mind if it comes from you or from me. Either's work, or even Warren.
Sure. Thanks, Warren.
Yep, sounds good to me. I prefer it comes from somebody other than me, the email. But yeah, general plan sounds good. Happy to run this. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. Rob, why don't you send the mail, and unless you send me a mail saying I prefer you to do it, and we'll go from there.
That's fine, and I'll copy you on, and I'll copy Warren on.
Sure. I'll please copy the at least NetMod chairs. I'll already get it because I'm on both lists, but the other chairs may not.
Okay.
Thank you. So moving on.
Oh, and I apologize for the abrupt screen share ending. That was the way I'm presenting the slides. When it hits the last slide, the tool just automatically stops sharing when I hit the next button. So
I appreciate it.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Okay, so my name's Rashad, and I'm going to be presenting a summary update on the versioning solution on behalf of authors and contributors. Next slide, please. So the agenda. So this slide deck, as just mentioned, is going to be presented by myself. The following presentations, we're going to be presenting the two main drafts, well, the two main ones we've been focusing on. The first presentation on updated module revision handling is going to be by myself, and then the one after, Yang semantic versioning, is going to be presented by Joe. Next, please. So that's a slide you probably have seen at 4 or 5 IETFs in a row now. So the versioning solution overview, basically this consists of 5 drafts. The first one is the module revision handling, which it supports branching. It introduces revision labels. It helps you how to document non-backwards compatible changes between different revisions and all that. The second one, Yang semantic versioning, which we've also called modified revision handling, semantic versioning in the past. It's basically an example of a revision label scheme. The third one is Yang packages, which basically allows you to group modules together and do versioning at schema level. Number 4, that's how to allow how to enable clients to select a version when a device supports multiple versions. And the last one is a comparison tool. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide also you've seen a few times. The colors and arrows might have changed a little bit, but that's basically the relationship between the 5 documents. There's hard dependencies and there's possible dependencies. Next, please. Okay, so those 2 questions have been brought forward, I think, by Rob and Joe, or maybe other people on the alias. There's 2 other documents, the first one being the requirements doc. That document is stable. There's been no changes since Singapore. Questions to the chairs and the working group is, do we bring this to an informational RFC, and do we go to working group last call now? And the second document is the overview one, which basically is the glue. It describes how all those 5 other solution drafts, glue together. Again, is this, do we take this to informational RFC? And if so, do we go to working group last call once all the 5 other drafts are at last call? I'm going to take a pause and see if anybody has something to say about that. Crickets?
For
Okay.
for the formal minutes from the last meeting, I believe what we had said on these is that we were going to hold them for and just keep them ready to last call as a group, as a set, just in case there were updates, rather than having to send out a BIS to an RFC that, probably by the time we're done with the process, it'll be right when we're publishing that we'll know there's changes. Of course, the alternative is that since it does take a while, that we hold it up at the last minute as opposed to the first minute of the publication process. So I believe, and I'm going through, I'm going from memory, so it may be wrong, but I believe we said we were going to hold them until the other documents were ready to go.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, module revision handling, that was adopted right before last IETF. This draft has had, fair number of changes since March. and the next presentation is going to go over those and the open issues. Similarly, for Yang semantic versioning, quite a few changes since March, and presentation to follow from Joe. Next slide. So the three other drafts of the set of 5 have had no changes since March. The authors and contributors in the weekly meetings have been focusing on the first 2. I think once we have soon, quote unquote, less issues or no issues on the first 2 drafts, then those 3 are going to be next in line to be progressed further. Next slide, please. So just a reminder to the working group, there's an open meeting, weekly meeting. It's the same set of people, you know, who meet every week or mostly every week. We've been doing that since March. We discuss the key issues. We bring them back to the working group mailing list, as you probably have seen. And so it's 2 p.m. UK time on Tuesday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Thanks for all the authors for regular attendance, and also to contributors, Bo, Jan, and Italo for meeting regularly. The issues are tracked on the link specified here on the second bullet. And as we were just saying, as I was just saying, we, in terms of phasing, we want to get the module versioning and Yang semantic versioning first to working group last call. And you know, as that is progressing, you know, we'll be then attacking the 3 remaining documents. And this is it for that presentation. Thank you. Again, my name's still Rashad, and I'm going to be presenting the Yang module versioning document. So the presentation, I mean, it's split in 2 parts. One, we're going to go over the changes we've done in the last revision. Those are mostly based on issues which had been brought forward around adoption call time, and also various issues we've been discussing among authors and contributors. Next slide, please. So the previous version of the document had some text which, you know, if it looks like a Yang semantic version, then we should be interpreting it as a Yang semantic version. The comment we had, I believe, from Martin was, well, you know, what if I use another flavor of semantic versioning? Well, you're going to interpret it as Yang semantic versioning, even if it's not. So we've updated the document we have a new extension which specifies what scheme a module or submodule uses. So it basically says how to interpret the revision label. That extension is to be used per module or submodule. The argument is an identity, which basically says, you know, what revision label scheme you are using. And it must be used if the module or submodule contains a revision label statement. If no questions, so at each of those slides, if you got any questions, please stop me at that point. So next slide, please. Revision label in file name. So the previous version of the document basically said if you had a file name, you would use the @ sign to put the revision label in. And the comment we got from a few people was that, Well, we're basically losing the functionality of using revision date. If we're looking for a certain revision date, then we need to look inside the module. And anyway, the comments were fairly consistent that what was there was not liked. So the document has been updated, and that's been mentioned on the list, that what we have now is we have the number sign, the pound sign, as delimiter in a file name. So you can use either @revision date, or you can use pound revision label. What that means is that you could have two file names for the same module contents. You may use symbolic link. You don't have to, but that's basically what that means. Any question on this? Not. Next slide.
Go ahead, Lada. Oh, he left the queue. Next.
Okay. Previous version of the document had text which was not very clear, regarding confused and stuff of that nature. We've updated section 3.3 of the latest revision to basically state that a submodule, it can have a statement for revision label scheme. It may use a different scheme than the including module. We went back and forth on that one. We basically have different scheme in the label, in the submodule.
We having a technical problem. Rasaj, audio is breaking up. I can't hear him at all anymore right now. And Lou confirms on private chat this is true for him. Is this for others as well?
Yeah, he's gonna try and rejoin.
Can you guys hear
Okay.
me now? Oh, now it's fine.
Yes.
Yes.
Echo and noise. Let me leave and come back. Just 1 second.
Authors want to jump in? That's a resounding no. Give him-
We do
give him
have
a break.
sufficient excess time on the agenda. I don't know how long it would take for him to join back.
I think
but
Rob is volunteering.
stepping up to the queue.
Thank you.
Okay. Can't hear you, Rob. And I see Rashad's coming back, so let's see if his audio is going to work. Rashad?
Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you better than before.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Rob, but if you insist, I'll let you. Okay, so we were on the submodule slide. So the text was not clear. That's a comment we got from a few people. And we've been updating, we've updated section 3.3 to allow submodule to have its own revision label scheme. We discussed, we had discussions as to whether it was desirable to allow submodule to have a different scheme than including module. And currently we allow it, but we would like feedback from the working group on this. We state, that's what the initial text was trying to say, that the label space of submodules is separate from the one of including modules. And the last 2 points there is basically saying that if you change a submodule, well, you must have a new revision label for that submodule and the including module. And finally, well, it's kind of obvious, but if you change a submodule, you're not changing the revision label in other submodules. Questions on this? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is in the context of, could we have 2 different files for the same module with same revision label, but different contents. And I forget whether this was brought up to the mailing list, but what we concluded in the meetings is to say that if 2 files have the same version, then the file contents have to be exactly the same. And by contents, one thing which is not clear in the current version is that including revision history also. So revision history has to be the same. So we're going to add the including revision history in section 3.3 of the next update. If no comment, next slide, please. Oh, I see Lada has a question.
Lada, did you have a question?
Yes, do you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you. And
Okay.
you may have had a question on a previous slide as well. So if you want me to go back to that, please say so.
Okay, so my previous question was that with having just even 2 options to specify the revision, this and using symlinks, as you said, this makes it even more difficult for systems like Git to use these file names, because you have to change the file name each time something changes. So that's one question I had previously, and now question to this label, to this slide. Or do you want to answer the first one, and then we can?
So the first one, thank you, Lada. I'm not sure I understood your question fully. So you're basically saying having the symbolic link is an issue, or not having symbolic link is an issue, or both are issues?
It is just another issue for systems like Git, but the basic issue is having this revision number encoded in the file name, which makes it difficult, because each time you change something in the file, you are supposed to change the file name. So it's then difficult to keep the history of that file. So to me, this is real something that makes it difficult for use in such systems like Git or GitHub.
But it's already like that for the revision date, right? Maybe that's the point I'm missing.
Yeah, it is true, but this is even worse if you have 2 options and maybe a symbolic link for them. So this is really awkward, I would say.
Okay. So the downside, if we don't do that, then that means if you're importing or searching by revision label, you really have to go to the contents of the file. So I'm not sure which is worse.
I understand this, but yeah.
Oh, it's a good point, but it's.
Can I just add a comment as well, Rashad?
Yep.
So Rob Wilton here is an individual. So I would have thought for Git, probably the best thing to do is potentially not to have the revision date or the original label in the the artifact is being stored in Git. But if you publish these somewhere else, that's the point you may want to put one or both of these on, is what I'm thinking.
Okay, that's possibility.
Kent as a contributor, I agree with Rob. I would do that as well.
Okay. So, and can we now move to the later slide? Here, so you are talking about a specific version of the module. Does it mean that this also includes some changes, let's say in white space, or does it mean that as soon as the schema remains the same, then the revision is the same, or what is the idea here?
That's a good question. We actually have as part of the next issues or discussion topics, there's a later slide for that, Lada. If you don't mind, we can wait until then.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. If no more questions, next slide, please. Okay, so the previous version of the document had the status description, which was kind of a workaround for not having description for status statements. A few people didn't like it, and it's, there's another workaround for it is to update the description of the attribute itself. So basically, we've removed the status description. And I believe there's an open issue against Yang Next for that. Next slide, please. So section 311 had text regarding ordering, but it was incomplete. The document has been updated. It talks about order of sub-elements in input and output, and also before that, the text said RPC only. Action is also okay covered. To summarize, we're basically adhering to 7950. Next slide, please. That was a relatively small issue. I believe that was comment from Martin. We had a couple of new leaf nodes which were of type empty, and he recommended we move to Boolean, and that's what we did. Next slide, please. Grammar for new extensions. So basically, the Yang modules, the extensions were not complete. They didn't have, basically the grammar describing in what statements those extensions can be present and what sub-statement they can have. Document has been updated. Next slide, please. So discussion topics. Those are basically the major, I think not just the major, all the open issues which are currently tracked in GitHub. And I doubt we'll close on all of them today, but your feedback on the mailing list would be very welcome. Next slide, please. So this issue is, this topic is, we've been discussing how making an MVC change in an imported module can break the importing module. So, you've got, let's say, module A at 1.0.0, and it's saying it's importing module B, it's stating 2.0.0 or derived. And again, those examples here use Semver. That's not limited to Semver. And let's say there's no major version greater than 2. So this means A will be importing some 2.y.z revision of module B. If at a later point in time, there's a new revision 3.0.0 of module B and there's MVC changes there, but there's no change in module A. But module A, because of that, module A may end up importing 3.0.0. And even then, even if it ends up importing 3.0.0, we don't know whether that has an impact on module A, because maybe the NBC change in module B has no impact on module A. It's a type which the importing module doesn't use, or it's a grouping that the importing module does not use. So the next step we have in mind right now is to add some text on, the impact of the guidelines and the impact of making non-backwards compatible changes in a module which is imported. I mean, many of those things are similar to the other guidelines we have, such as, obsoleting a node before deprecating it, etc. Any comment on this or question?
Kent, as a contributor, I'm wondering if it's possible to make it that the instead of 2.0 or derived, it can be anything 2.0 or greater, but not but less than or equal, but less than 3.0.
Okay. So you're basically saying I want something 2.0 compatible with 2.0.0.
Yeah, but programmatic as opposed to description text.
Yes. So we've actually had a little bit of discussions last week via email that came up exactly for the same reason. We haven't closed on that yet, and I think it's still an open item on our side to see whether we want to go ahead with that. That's probably one of the things we're going to be discussing in the meeting after IETF. I think also when we discussed that via email, we did not have consensus among the authors and contributors. So I would welcome any of them to make comments on this. But to answer your question, Kent, yes, this is something which is possible.
Okay, thank you.
It's not covered in the document now, but it's something which we have to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, just since we're discussing it, I can imagine, yes, 3.0 means there's a break and backwards compatibility, but the break and backwards compatibility may not be around the area that matters, and so it's okay. I can imagine how the discussion could go both ways. I appreciate that. Thank you. Go ahead, Rob.
So I think Kent makes a good point there, and that's the same one I would have raised. The other thing to be aware of here is that the import revision X or derived is actually doing it by the revision date and the revision history. So it's not, although you can use the version label to identify it, it's not actually using any semantic meaning from the version label to make decisions. So that's the other thing we need to be very careful about here, that even though SEMVer numbers are being used in those revision labels, that's not exactly what the underlying mechanics are being used here in terms of choosing which version, which revision of a module is being imported. That's been done purely by the revision history. I'm not sure that's helpful or more confusing than what's been said previously.
Kent again, as a contributor, just adding on to my previous comment. In the Python package publishing world, many times people publish packages, and so for instance, right now, I have some Python packages that are being published, and they declare compatibility with 3.7, 3.8, and really, I expect compatibility also with 3.9, but specifically, I say not compatible with 4.0 or above. But as soon as it's discovered when 4.0 is released, and I can do some testing, and I can see that things work, then I would update that restriction and allow for the 4.0. So maybe something like that, where initially, just because you don't know what the future brings, it's constrained. But then once some visibility is provided, or the constraint can be relaxed.
The problem is, though, that is the decision is not being based on whether it's 4.0 or not, or 4.0. The decision is being based on whether the revision history of the module you're importing contains the revision you're looking at. So it's not looking at the semantic version labels at all. It's just looking at the dates and seeing is this one in the revision history newer than the minimum revision date that you've specified. So I think that's something we need to be careful here. That's because you've got a split between the revision dates and revision labels in the base draft and the Yang semantic version numbers in a separate draft. Then the sort of constructs between the two are slightly separate. Maybe that's a bit confusing, but I'm not sure we can really mitigate that.
Confusing. And furthermore, it sounds broken. I mean, the whole purpose of this effort is to fix this problem.
I missed the first part of your comment. Maybe I'll send an example, or one will send an example on the alias.
So my understanding of what Kent is saying is that the whole purpose of this effort was to allow when NBC changes happen. And in this case, we're doing an NBC change, and it could break. It could not break, but it could break. Did I understand your question right, Kent?
You did, and I think it's the case that when the microphone's turned on, the first couple seconds may be getting clipped. So just to repeat myself, what I said is it does sound confusing, and that it did seem broken because I thought the whole intent of this effort was to resolve these issues.
No, fair point.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it does resolve this issue, but I think that we need to look carefully as to whether there would be confusion in terms of how these are used.
Next slide. Unless we have. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, same clipping problem. This is Lou as chair. Rob, I think it'd be really good if you send your example to the list to help facilitate that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, this is a follow-up to the previous issue. The first two steps are exactly the same as in the previous issue. If the difference here is that we're looking at a case where there's an explicit change to module A, where module A now goes, hey, I want version 3.0.0 or derived. Is this a BC or an NBC change? So we started discussing this, and I mean, there's also a next slide on this, just to, before I start getting questions on the two options, I just want to say that I don't believe there is unanimity amongst the authors and contributors yet. But we'll get on that, we'll get to that on the next slide. So the first option, which option A, basically states that depending on the impact of changing that import statement, a decision is made on whether the change to module A is BC or NBC. So for example, if module B changed a type or restricted a range which is used by module A, you would go non-backwards compatible, else you would go backwards compatible. The pros of this, well, you know, you made a change in module A and you address the version label of module A accordingly. The change is, again, is an import statement change. The cons against this is that, you know, there's questions as to whether this makes it harder contooling. There's also the potential issue that it is inconsistent with the previous issue, although that point may change depending on how we resolve or if we resolve the previous issue. So again, option A is you look at the impact of changing your import case statement. So just to make it clear, two different modules might be importing the same module B and both going to 3.0 or derived. One may decide this is BC and the other may decide it's NBC. the second option, option B, is to say the changing of an import statement is always considered to be backwards compatible itself, and to address any impact to the importing module via some other means. Yang packages was discussed, potentially Yang library also. Sorry, one point I forgot to mention in option A. One comment against that is that it was felt that if you're making an NBC change in module B, and if you end up making revision labels NBC change to both A and B, that could be viewed as double jeopardy, for lack of a better term, that there's two version changes because of that. I guess that's one way of looking at it. Anyway, back to option B. The good thing about that is that, well, good, maybe. Whether your imported module is changing or whether you're making a change to the import statement, it's the same, it's dealt in exactly the same way. What's not nice about it is looking at the version of module A, you don't get the full picture. It may, you're looking at 1.0.0 and it's 1.0.1, sorry, 1.1.0, and you think it's backwards compatible with 1.0, and it's not. Next slide, please. So we are split on this topic. When I did the slides, I put rough consensus was an option B. I'm not sure right now. It might be more equal. Another way of looking at this is whether the revision label of a module is for the complete schema of the module, including imported modules, or whether it's only for the kind of schema of that module file's contents. And yes, we would like very much to hear from the working group. I mean, I know we can't resolve this here, but I mean, I'd like to have questions here or comments, but definitely questions or comments on the mailing list would be very appreciated.
I was just going to ask a quick question. Is the example sufficiently clear, as is Rob, sufficiently clear for people to understand what's being asked? It may be that we have to put this again in an email to the working group list to make sure people understand the problem and what's being asked, because it may be that it's hard to follow.
Rob, just to be clear, are you speaking as a contributor or as AD?
Contributor, I guess.
So I can take the AI of sending an email.
Sorry, Rashad. Yeah, please do send the email. This is Drew again. I thought I understood it until your last statement, quite honestly. When your last statement, where the revision implies everything that it includes as well, to me sounds like the sort of the package, almost getting towards the packages document. So I had a little trouble parsing what you meant there.
Okay, so that point might not have been the one which was the most well made. So please revert your understanding to what it was before looking at the change to the import statement. I was just trying to provide a different angle way of looking at it. I thought it would make things clearer, but looks like it has not. So ignore bullet 3 on the current slide.
Yeah, going back to the point where we talked over each other, I think you were saying you were going to send something to the list. It seems that we're not getting a lot of feedback from the group in this, in this new way of doing business, of holding our IETFs. So I think, if you can send it to the list and try to get discussion going that way, I think that would be great. So appreciate
Thank you.
that.
Will do. Next slide, please. So this started as discussions of what's backwards compatible, non-backwards compatible, and does it depend on config true or false. So initially we were considering revisiting what's in 7950, basically because if the BC and BC rules in 7950 basically applies from the point of view of a device. If you're configuring that device and if you're shrinking the value space of a config false node, for example, that's backwards compatible. So in essence, what we discuss is that the way 7950 is done and an MDA and all that, it's basically expecting clients to be liberal in what they receive. So our plan right now is to not touch this at all. And based on discussions, it's become very clear that defining explicit rules as to what BC or what's backwards compatible or not becomes very complicated when you look at stuff like features. You might have a statement which says if not feature as opposed to if okay feature. So we want to stay away from this. So what we thought was potentially a good idea, we believe, is a Pandora's box. So the update is no change. And if this is needed, we believe this should be part of Yang Next, not part of this document. Next slide, please. This is, what's the impact of, you've got a Yang module, it's got an extension statement. Extension statement exists. You either change the existing statement, you remove it, or you add it. We had some discussions in the meetings. We thought maybe we could come with a rule which applies everywhere. And the feedback, I think, really is this really depends on the extension. How do we capture this per extension? Should each extension describe the impact of adding that extension, changing the extension, removing the extension? And I think Balazs pointed out that this was actually, it's the extension thing is part of that Yang Next issue. So we're not too sure what to do about this, except, put guidelines what extension statements should have in their description for this. Also questions like, what should tooling do if it doesn't understand that extension? Should it just default to editorial? That kind of stuff. And on this too, I can follow up on the alias after IETF. If no comment, next slide. So 6991 BIS has a type def for revision identifier, and currently Yang module is the IETF Yang revisions is using that definition from 6991 BIS. One concern we have is, if 6991 BIS, and it's a big if, becomes version someday, this would create a circular dependency when, IETF Yang versions would depend on 6991 BIS and vice versa. So what we will be doing, or strongly considering doing, I'm not sure, is removing the dependency on Yang revision identifier, not specifically because of Yang revision identifier, but to have no dependency on 6991 BIS. That's the current plan.
think we just lost Rashad's audio again.
He left and rejoined. Just reported he got kicked out of the room, and maybe that Rashad is having the same issue. That's not good. I just flagged Meet Echo. They haven't responded yet.
Okay, can you hear me now, Lou?
You're back.
Okay, thank you. Should we wait a little bit, or should we resume?
I suggest we
Yeah,
resume.
as a contributor.
Joel notes in the chat that we dropped from 56 to 55. We're back to 56. Kent, over to you.
Yeah, Kent as a contributor. So you were talking about removing the dependency on 699biz, which would also remove the use of the revision identifier. What would then the module do? Would it define its own revision identifier?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, so this is Lada's question from earlier regarding what about, all white space changes allowed with two modules having the same version. We discussed that a fair bit among the authors, contributors. We don't have unanimity. Most of the authors, contributors believe that white space change should result in a new revision label indicating, for example, in the case of Yang Samver, indicating editorial change. The main reason for this is we believe we want to be explicit. If you're basically validating a module, doing a checksum, that's way easier. Otherwise, if you're comparing two versions, you might need to do normalization and stuff like that. But we understand that this may be issue for some implementation or some tools.
Questions in the queue, Charles?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to understand the use case, why a updated version of a module would get published that had only white space changes. I can see white space changes along with other things, but it seems like, if I understand this question correctly, it's what if the only change was white space? And if the only change was white space, why would someone choose to update a module just to make white space changes? Because I don't understand that use case.
So I let's go. Sorry, Lada, go ahead.
So can I? Or
Yeah, actually, Lada wasn't talking just a moment ago, Rashad. I thought there was an echo or someone else with this, but now Lada's been acknowledged. Lada, please come back to the queue if needed. I'm not sure. Maybe it was Charles who was talking.
Yeah, this is Charles Eckel. Sorry if my announcement of my name got cut off or if I forgot to do it. But yeah, I just had a question about white space change and why would. I understand what's being proposed here is that the only change in the module is white space change. Do you still need to update the revision label? And I was just trying to understand the use case of why someone would ever make only white space changes and want to upload a new version of something for that reason. Because I can see making white space changes in addition to other changes, and not wanting that to, that's sort of a side effect of maybe some tooling or something. But I don't see the use case where the only thing you would do would be make white space changes, and that you would intentionally want to check in or create a new version of a module just for that reason.
It's a good question. It's a good point. I don't have an answer for you because I think the persons who were recommending this, I think we're referring to more to internal implementations or tooling, so I don't have a good answer for you. And I agree that it seems a bit odd that you would do that.
Okay.
Okay, so next in the queue is Lada.
There was a comment in Jabber. I don't know if you want to read it, Ken, or if you want to.
I didn't see it. Please, Luke, go ahead.
Okay, this is from Jan. There's probably no reason to publish with only white space changes. The point is that there should be a version number for every different checkbox.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. So I wouldn't, I mean, this question kind of becomes moot, but I guess the answer then would be if for some reason a module got published with only white space changes, yeah, it would need a new version number because the checksum would change. But basically, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that, but we are trying to come up with a comprehensive solution that covers all cases, and I think they're just being thorough.
That works for me.
Q is Lada at the back. Lada, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is a tricky issue with this white space because in the Yang spec we still have this alternative syntax called the yin, and while I may be the last person to use it, it's still there. So it looks like basically this syntax cannot be used for this versioning because otherwise it's really difficult to have the same revision in both syntaxes due to this white space issue. So I think this is really problematic to have the version changed after some white space changes and so on. So far, I had the idea that the two syntaxes are basically considered equivalent. So.
This is Kent as a contributor responding to Lada's comment. But a lot of the yin files have a different suffix. So how is that a problem?
Well, but I guess the revision in any format has to be written in the module itself, right? So I don't think that the suffix can change this.
Next in the queue is Joe, acknowledging Joe. It looks like Joe left the queue. Joe's back. I'm sorry, the tool's kind of flaky here.
I didn't mean to leave the queue. Thank you.
You're here.
So, Lada, if I understand, if I had a module foo that was written in Yang and the same module foo in Yin, they could both have the same semantic version revision label, and if I revised module foo in both Yang and Yin syntax, then even though the syntax or the language is different, the ultimate the modules are equivalent, so the versions could be parallel. If I converted one-to-one, I mean, we're changing the whole syntax, but we're not changing the meaning of the module. So I would imagine the version number could stay the same. I think what we've been saying with this, at least, and maybe we have to consider the alternate syntax as well, but what we've been saying with this, at least in our calls, is if I, for whatever reason, decide to publish in the same syntax, a Yang module foo, and all I make is white space changes, not change the overall syntax, like remove trailing white space on a line, for example, then we would want to note that. And the reason is mainly we've come to the agreement that if I'm looking at foo.yang, at two versions of foo.yang, I would want my SHA-1, SHA-256, MD5, whatever checksum tool to show they're going to be different. So I would want them to have different version numbers. So I'm aware that, okay, there is some differences. Maybe it's just editorial, but I need to maybe be aware of that. Same thing for other text processing tools. If it's foo.yang and foo.yin, I'm already aware that they're going to be different. So I'm not necessarily looking to compare apples to apples. But if I look at foo.yang 1.00 and foo.yin 1.00, I would expect the same overall schema, the same overall, for lack of a better term, meat of the module.
Yeah, this is Lada again. Well, consider that someone just takes the module in the yin syntax and uses some tool for translating it to yang. And as far as I know, there is no requirement that this translation has to be the same, including white space handling, and it isn't. If you use different tools, then really you can come up with something different. So to me, this would mean that, of course, this requirement on everything being the same, so that you can make the SHA hash or something, this simply breaks down after this, this translation, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. In that regard, comparing a .yang to a .yin, even if there's the same module and same version, their text tools aren't going to do you much good. You're going to need the deeper set of tools. Like I said, we hadn't considered the alternate syntax. We've just been wanting to help, like, the human brain identify that if I'm looking, I wouldn't want to see foo.yang 1.00 and another foo.yang 1.00 have different checksums. That would bother me. That was the main use case. So I guess what I'm ultimately saying is we'll probably have to have a bit more conversation on this.
It looks like we may have lost Rashad again. Can anyone take over this presentation? We are running late and cannot wait any longer. Acknowledging Joe. Can you do it, Joe?
Trying to. There we go. I'll do my best because I'm the next presenter anyway. This is Joe Clark, Cisco.
Hi, Joe. Thank you.
So we, after Lada's comment, we knew that there was going to be more discussion here. Regardless, this was going to end up in Yang semantic versioning because, well, just frankly, the lineage part of the actual module versioning doesn't really matter. It's like if I'm going to release another revision of a module, then it's going to have another revision and it's going to extend that lineage. We were wanting to know how to reflect that in Yang semantic versioning. So I get, and Rashad's back, but I don't know what the chairs want to do here. I can keep going or pass it over to him. He's probably better prepared at this point.
Sorry, I got kicked out again. So we are on the insignificant white space change.
Yeah, we kind of finished that. Lada made the comment about yin versus yang syntax, and we realized we're going to need some more conversation about this.
Okay. Then next slide, please. Yep, next. So as you can see, we've got a few outstanding issues, a few of those going to be discussed on the alias. We'd like to, our plan is to get it to working group last call, our desire, before our next ITF. And this is it. I want to remind people again that we have weekly meetings. So if you want to contribute in any way, please join us. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to try to get through this quick. Hi, my name is Joe Clark. I'm Cisco representing the authors and contributors for Yang semantic versioning. Next slide, please. All right, so what changed between our last virtual interim and today? We replaced the rather disliked lowercase m and uppercase m suffixes. We'll get into that. We removed that text that Rashad mentioned that said anything that looks like a semantic versioning, quacks like a semantic versioning, must be a Yang semantic version. We now extend the revision label scheme identity. We've applied some guidelines based on some feedback from the list for both general module author development as well as IETF specific module development on how to use semantic versioning within a development cycle, so before a module becomes fully released. We expanded the version component size. It was a kind of an odd 32,768, which wouldn't have really fit in a by 2 boundary, all the way up to 2 to the 31st minus 1. So each version component, major, minor, patch, can be relatively large. We don't necessarily expect that, but like Lou said earlier, we're trying to account for all possible scenarios. And finally, we added some IETF module development flow as an example into an Appendix A. Next slide, please. All right, so the new suffixes, we got rid of M and M because those were kind of just known to us when we were doing the design team, and there was a lot of ambiguity really, as well as where they were positioned could lead people to believe that they were actually part of the version itself. Instead, we opted for something that is compatible with the SemVer 2.00 spec, but is very detailed, and that is the _ compatible and _ non_ compatible, with the former being the stand-in for lowercase m and the latter being the stand-in for uppercase m. Now remember, these are the sticky labels that when you can't, as you see in the example here, when you've got a 1.0 and you went to 1.1.0 to make some backwards compatible changes, and then you released a non-backwards compatible 2.0.0, and again, these are the Yang semantic version revision labels. You might have gone with a 1.1.1 for some bug fixes, but then your customer said, you know what, I need you to port that new feature to my 1.1 module, and well, you can't go, well, in that case, you could go to a 1.2, but they didn't want to do that for whatever reason, let's say. So you had to add this _ compatible. So this module is compatible. Then in the last case there, 1.1.3 non-compatible, you couldn't go to 2.0 since it already existed, and that was something else. But maybe that same customer wanted you to backport a breaking change to their 1.1 module. So those are where those sticky tags come in. And once something goes to the non_ compatible, adds that NBC change where there's already a major fork in the module, that's when that can never leave. So if there was a 1.1.4, even if it just contained bug fixes onto 1.1.3, 1.1.3 non-compatible, it would also need to retain the _ non_ compatible. We think in general this is going to be not that frequently used, but we know already from a number of vendors that there is a need for this. So this just replaces the M and the M to be a little bit clearer with what those suffixes mean. Next slide, please. And again, I'm watching to see if anyone steps up, so interrupt me at any time. We added a new revision label scheme. This just extends, this is the very small Yang module at the end of the Yang Simver draft. This extends what Rashad mentioned in the Yang, or the module versioning draft. So we just add a scheme there and we reference the draft that talks more about the syntax. There's also a type def in the same module that mentions the actual syntax for Yang semantic versioning. But you must reflect this scheme if you're using Yang Simver. Next slide, please. So, guidelines for module development. We went back and forth with what a in development or not ratified, or whatever you want to call it, released module version should be. And what we went for was something that we wanted to be very explicit. So this is what would be an example for a module, a net new module. You could use the 0 notation, and that is the 0 major version, I should say, that is mentioned in the draft. But in this case, maybe you've gotten a little bit more along in your development process. So you're saying that this is going to will be when it's ratified, the 1.0.0 version of this module. While in development, you include the full draft name that the module is currently published in. And this would only be required for those modules which are going to be, or versions which are going to be submitted to Data Tracker, let's say. So if you're just doing a lot of back and forth with a team in GitHub, you may not increment this all the time. But when you're going to publish a new draft, with the module, you would do this. You would add the full draft name to the module after a dash and include the current draft revision. If you go to the next slide, the reason we chose this was to support parallel development as well. So oftentimes you may have, especially in maybe the BIS case, you might have two initially competing proposals for a solution. And we wanted to make sure that there was a way of differentiating the two. So in this case, this is not a net new module. This is an enhancement to an existing published 1.0.0, let's say. The target is going to be 1.1, but both Jane Doe and John Doe have proposed different initial solutions. And they might have the module version would be the same 1.1.0, the target, but the drafts that contain those modules are different. So we have the support for that. They can happen in parallel. Then let's say the working group would adopt one of these, or maybe a combination of these. The draft name would change to, it would still be 1.1.0, but it would be draft.ietf.netmod, so on and so forth. So the moral of the story is these version numbers all have to be unique. And by using the draft, by using this target approach, by including the draft revision, even with parallel development like this, we get unique versions even in development. And that was one of the things we were striving for. But as you'll see in an upcoming slide, it did, I think Italo mentioned that it does open up an issue. So we're going to talk about that. Next slide, I think, is a filler slide. So I'll pause for a second because I know we're running out of time. No questions. I don't see someone coming up. So discussion topics. Speaking of the devil, here is that issue. So let's say the target module is initially going to be the next revision, you plan a non-backwards compatible change, a major version change. So the initial target becomes 2.0.0, and you do that pre-release notation. Then during development, you decide, you know what, there really isn't consensus for this NBC change. We're going to make it backwards compatible. But if you go backwards in your version number, your target version number, there's an issue with precedence, with pre-release precedence, that now you can't say that 1.1.0 pre-release is greater than the previous 2.0.0 pre-release. There's a breakage there. discussion has been maybe who cares? This is a development, and really what people are looking for are those ratified, released, like formally production, GA, whatever you want to call it, released versions. That said, people do implement development versions of the modules, and we might want to say instead that version numbers shouldn't go backwards, with a capital should not go backwards, but we realize in some cases they might, and this might just prompt people to make a initial target version number that's smaller. They can always take that up if they need it towards the end of development, like right at the end of development, make it a 1.1 or a 2.0, and that way you inform them of the risks of making too big of a target leap, while at the same time you're recognizing that in general the guidance is to do small increments, and then right at the end say this is what the official release, GA, whatever, again, whatever you want to call it, version number for the revision label will be. So that's still in discussion on those calls that Rashad mentioned. We still need to close on that. Don't see anyone jumping up. So next slide, which is our last discussion point. I hear noise.
That's me, sorry.
I didn't know if there was a question. Okay, so the big elephant-ish thing in the room is, do we mandate using revision labels for IETF modules, and do we mandate using Yang Simver as the scheme for those revision labels? Thus far, the authors and contributors on these weekly calls have said yes. The reason being, the primary reason is it allows human beings to look at two different modules quickly, revisions of the same module quickly, and see that, you know what, there are differences here, and I may need to use some more tooling and dig a little bit deeper to understand the true nuances of those differences. But at a glance, if you have two revisions of the module, you know whether or not they're backwards compatible, or if there are differences, or what level of differences there are. And then the second addendum to this question is, there are some IANA controlled modules. Should they also use this Yang Simver revision label? Admitting the rules will probably be much simpler here because we're not necessarily expecting any NBC changes. But those are the open questions in addition to the white space thing we already raised, or Rashad raised, for Yang Simver. Comments?
So we are running out of time, and
Okay.
I welcome anybody to please come to the mic, and if you have a question on this, do so while I'm switching slides. And
Perfect.
Okay, great. Jürgen, if you could come to the queue, come to the mic.
And we'll also take this to the list. The
Yes.
proposed will definitely take to the list. Important questions. We are running late enough that we only have 13 minutes late, so this is likely to be the last slot, and we're going to probably run out of time for the individual draft.
Jürgen, you should be able to go.
I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, very, very good. Hello, this is Jürgen. So I'll try to be quick. Go to the next slide. I've posted all the issues to the list, so it's good if people actually follow up on the list if they have specific comments, because we're running short on time. The first one is the Yang date, which is more like a reminder. There was also no comment on the list. Essentially, the change that is being proposed is to make the time zone optional. At the moment, the date has a mandatory time zone, and that kind of limits certain users of the type. And so the proposal is to make that actually optional and add additional clarifying text, what it means if you don't have the time zone. There was no comment, so I believe people wait for my edits, and that's it. Go to the next slide, please. There was a a discussion issue on the XPath definition, which is a little bit XML encoding specific and doesn't really say anything about what happens if you have expressions that where the prefixes are not necessarily XML prefixes, but might actually be something different. This is a bigger issue that Yang has because it originally, so when it comes also to the node instance identifier, it's a little bit XML specific in that space. And at the moment, it seems the best option is to not do anything at this point in time and to rather wait until Yang Next has probably resolved that issue. And so my proposal is to leave the definition as it is, essentially waiting for Yang Next to eventually clear this up. Next issue. That's the Yang node instance identifier. The background here was there's a definition of node instance identifier in the NACM module. And some people wanted to use it without having a dependency on NACM. And that's why I copied it over into 699.1 bis. Now it has the same issue. It's kind of XML specific and it has little details in there. And the proposal I'm making is to do exactly the same, to not copy it over at this point in time. So if people want to use node instance identifier, they would import it from NACM as they do now. And to rather wait until Yang Next has resolved the issue and then probably have a new definition that is consistent with what the Yang Next solution in this space is. Slide number 5. People suggested to add longitude, latitude, which I think we should not add because we have a separate document. Even though it doesn't really define types, it defines groupings. So I don't really know the details whether there's an issue with that. But I believe we should, now that we have a separate document, we should actually put those definitions there. Also proposed was postal code and country code, which I started to look up whether there's official definitions how these are structured. So for country codes, there's an ISO registry, but it also, if you go into the details, has interesting deviations of what we, for instance, use in the DNS. For postal code, there's something like the Universal Postal Union that actually has an idea of what the format is of postal codes. In general, I'm not sure how frequently those will be used and whether it's actually worth the effort to come up with a reasonably precise definition of what this is, and instead of those people using it, just putting a string there and being done with it. So my proposal is to actually do nothing at this point in time because it might be a can of worm and probably the effort is not really worth it. Slide number 6. Yang percentage. So percentages are quite frequently used in drafts and Yang modules. There is a definition of a percentage type, which has an integer definition of the range 0 to 100, which is an RFC 8294. It's the common writing types document or Yang module. So for people who need exactly that type of percentage type definition, you can actually get it already today. And I don't think it's worth copying that over into Yang types just so that it's not in the writing types. For people who need other percentages, like where you have fractions or where you have a larger range that goes beyond 100, I believe it's so simple to define this type that it's probably not useful to come up with a set of percentage types definitions that might be generally useful. So I would, again, my proposal is to not add a percentage type. If you need a integer 0 to 100 range type, there is one. And for the other ones, just roll your own one. Slide number 7. INET host. So this is one of the issues where we had a longer email discussion between Lada and Tom primarily. And it seems we seem to be converging. This is not the latest version. There was some more email today. The issue was that the host name was just a a domain name, which is a sequence of A labels. And there are additional restrictions for host name. For instance, you are not allowed to have an underscore in there, and that wasn't really captured. And so what this type dev does is capturing that. So a host name is restricted to letters and digits and dashes and dots. And there's a requirement that a host name has to be at least 2 characters long, which is captured here. We ended up having a side discussion about internationalized domain names. So the way you represent an internationalized domain name is currently using the ASCII compatible encoding, which is not very convenient. And so we today had a discussion between Lada and myself to probably have a second definition that allows to represent internationalized domain names. It would be not a change to the existing definitions, but it would be more a new definition so that people who want to get that support natively can choose to pick the new definition. So I think we are reaching agreement on what to do, and I think I understand the edits, so I will put something into the next revision. Slide 8. There was a suggestion, I think it was originally coming from Kent, to add an email address definition. And the best thing that probably can be done is to use the address spec that's also used in the mail to URL scheme. And that has a number of formats, but at the moment, the definition doesn't really capture all of them. And so there's work to be done to capture in the regular expression all the different formats that address spec allows. And so what I need to do is it's homework. It's tweaking regular expressions to get them right. And actually, I have a separate collection of test cases, and I probably need to write up enough test cases to make sure that the pattern actually does the right thing. If anybody wants to help with this, send me an email. Help in getting this right is welcome. Slide number 9. There was a proposal to add, there's a URI type, and there was a proposal to actually have a broken out version. So you have a URN scheme and the URI authority and the URI path and URI query. There are some technical issues. The non-technical issue is that it's not clear to me how commonly used those data types would be. It was only suggested once, and then nobody ever said, yeah, I really need this. I'm really waiting for this. And given that, my tendency is to say, well, at the moment, don't add it because it's not clear that the demand is really high enough for adding those types. People would have to speak up if they really insist on getting those types. Slide 10. Loopback addresses. That was the latest request that came in. So some people have a need to represent loopback addresses. And that's a fairly special kind of address. For if you think about configuration, usually you don't even configure loopback addresses, they just are system assigned. But anyway, there seems to be an MPLS thingy that actually uses loopback addresses. And I could add those in. I don't know how commonly used they will be. I'm pretty neutral on this. I don't really have a strong feeling in favor or against adding those types. If we start doing that and add specific types for different kinds of addresses, it's of course clear that we will get lots of them over time because there will be multicast addresses. There will be all sorts of subsets of IP addresses that will likely have to fold in, which might not be bad. But it's kind of interesting that it starts with loopback addresses, which I would not have expected. Anyway, so here I really need guidance whether I should put it in or not. I'm pretty neutral on that. And I think that was the set of 10 slides, and I give you 2 minutes back. Any questions?
Hi, this is Kent as a contributor. I do have questions, but I'll take them to the list.
Great.
And I think with the 2 minutes, maybe we can try to bring up the next presentation. I know it's not really there enough time for them, but I'll start queuing up those slides in the background.
If the presenter is here, they should come into the, oh, there you are. Great.
Ching. So how many minutes do I have?
About 1.5 until the cutoff. It's not much, I know. Go, please go.
Okay, this is Ching Wu, and actually this about telemetry data tagging. Actually, this is not a new draft, and we already presented in the last ITA meeting. Next. Actually, this document status, actually, we already get a lot of support in HAM, virtual HAM conducted by Etherpad, and the IPR call has already been concluded, and one IPR has been disclosed. And in the recent version, actually, we main changes, we added one usage case. Next. So main idea, actually, the problem we want to solve is we already can, achieve milliseconds or seconds data connection rate, but facing massive data connection processing, actually, it may overload the network device and consume too much network resource. So what we try to do is we can actually tag the telemetry data to capture key feature data, and we can provide a better network visibility. And next. Yeah, so the instance of this draft actually is provide telemetry data classification. The key parameter we propose like a OPM tag. It can classify telemetry data into object type, property, metric, and metric can be also seen as a KPI data. It actually, if it is a KPI data, actually we also can specify operation type and a range of the KPI data and provide granularity the metric unit, and we also classify the telemetry data from data source type and based data source type, and also if the KPI data can come from different source, actually we can indicate whether this KPI is aggregated data. So this is the main idea. And next. Next.
Jen, we're about to get cut off, and I think it's probably best that we just stop here, and we'll have to pick up this discussion on the list, I think. And
okay,
but yeah, Lou, did you have any closing comments that you want to make?
On this one and planning to do an adoption call. I think I will ask for the adoption call what part is covered by IPR, just so that the group understands what is being requested.
Okay.
And I think similar work was being presented in NetConf. We probably should look to see what's the level of the importance of the work.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, they actually so there's some dependency, but also they can decouple from that kind of work in that call. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry for at least we were able to give you that little bit. Thank you everybody for joining, and I will send minutes to the list when they're ready and pick up on the discussions there for all the other items. Thank you.